Recently, gold surpassed the previous all-time highs of $1,891.90, and this was set back in August 2011. With gold seeming to be soaring high right now, and I think that gold could continue soaring higher than $2,000, I'm looking into smaller mining stocks or gold stocks right now to help diversify my portfolio in terms of growth stocks out there. And for those of you guys who are wondering why I'm looking into small mining companies, is because these small mining companies who have good businesses out there have great potential for stock price appreciation. However, these stocks do also come with significant risk, so I'll be doing deeper dives into companies as well as only picking the ones that I do believe in, and I will be letting you know in future videos what gold company I do end up investing into if I do end up investing in gold. When gold prices go up, the gold miners out there or gold producers out there, they benefit because their margins are ultimately higher. When people are willing to pay more for the same quantity of a metal, and the company has a fixed cost to produce that metal, then ultimately the company will profit a lot more if they're able to sell it at a higher price and keep the production cost the same as it was a couple years ago. And I think the primary reason as to why people are buying gold or gold stocks right now is because the interest rates are so low, and it's possible that interest rates could even go negative. So holding your wealth in cash is not exactly the best idea. So investors are seeking places to store their wealth, such as gold or even Bitcoin for that matter. Resources like Bitcoin and gold, they have a finite amount, and therefore they're able to hold their value because once all the supply has run out, you can't get any more of it. So ultimately, the goal of holding gold is to protect yourself against inflation. So let's talk about gold right now. What's up, you guys? Welcome back to the Fire Grind. My name is Daniel, and on this channel, we talk about personal finance and stock market investing. Previously, I've been talking a lot about technology stocks and how I'm purchasing a lot of them in my portfolio right now. And if you guys haven't seen my previous video, check that out right up here. It talks about my portfolio for the August update. But right now, we're going to turn our attention over to some gold stocks in the following weeks. So the first company that I have for you here today is Inca One Gold. So what does Inca One Gold Corp do? Inca One Gold Corp is a Canadian-based mineral resource company and mineral processing company with 2 gold milling facilities in Peru, servicing government-permitted small-scale miners. A highly mineral-rich country, Peru is one of the world's top producers of gold, silver, copper, lead, and zinc, with substantial production coming from small-scale miners who need government-permitted milling facilities to process their gold-bearing material. So as you can see here, Peru right now has a lot of minerals that need to be processed, and there's a lot of small mining companies out there. However, they don't have the capital to build out processing plants. So what Inca Gold is doing is they're buying the unprocessed ore from these small miners and processing it for them. So in my opinion, this is a fairly foolproof investment because you're not relying on your own miners or your own mines to produce gold. You're going to get ores from whichever miners actually can produce ores that can end up being gold. So what Inca One Gold is acting as is basically a middleman. They will take the unprocessed gold, so whoever has gold that day and was able to dig up ores, process it in their plant and sell it out on the market. They're not at risk of running dry in their mine and eventually shutting down because they can go to the next miner who also will find some ore, or the next miner, or the next miner, or the next miner. And before we move on, I figured I should show you guys the charts of gold and how it's been progressing and give a few projections I think what might happen in the following future. So here you can see the historical price of gold. It's always been under $2,000 until sometime in August. Around August 3rd, it hit $2,000 for the first time. The previous time when gold really rose up was in the 2011 period, where we saw it hit somewhere around $1,900 or close to $1,900. And then since then, it's petered off and been sitting around the $1,100 for maybe like 5 years or so. So we can see here that gold has actually lost quite a bit of value over the past 5 years, and that's because equities have done very well and investors pulled their money out of gold and put it into equities. However, with most of the world's equities, aside from tech stocks right now, plummeting, we can see that investors are seeking safety in gold. And that's why we had the recent run up in gold, especially in the February or March time when we saw COVID hit, and it's continued to skyrocket since then. So what I think is going to happen right now is because we've just hit all-time highs, I don't think that gold is going to pull back anytime soon because of inflation. And we know that Jerome Powell said inflation is probably going to accelerate over the next couple of years because he's going to keep interest rates low as long as possible. So when interest rates stay low, what happens to inflation is that it increases at a faster rate than it normally would. So for those of you guys who are interested in looking up Inca Gold right now, we can go to the stock charts. You can see that the ticker symbol is IO and they're traded on the TSX Venture. For those of you who are in America, they do trade over the counter there, so you can find their company just by searching up their name on Yahoo Finance. As of today, their stock sits at around 69 cents per share, and today there was actually quite a large drop, and we saw the stock drop by 11.5%. So what I think going forward for the stock is it's probably going to come back down to its 50-day moving average, and possibly even a little bit further to its 100-day moving average. But for me personally, what I'm looking for is for this company to drop down to its 200-day moving average before I make any sort of move into this company. I think that there's a fairly large run-up recently, and for that reason, I'm waiting for more of a pullback before investing in this company. But if we look at some of the statistics behind this company, we can see in the summary section that they have a market cap of $22 million, making them a nano cap stock. Microcap stocks sit somewhere between $50 million and $300 million, and Inca One Gold Corp is below that at $22 million. Right now, they're not a profitable company as their PE ratio is non-existent, and their earnings per share is roughly negative 16 cents per share. However, analysts do have a one-year target for the stock to be at $1.44, so there is quite a bit of upside for the stock, according to analysts. We'll dive into the financials a little bit later, but let me give you a few business highlights about this company first. So they launched a direct-to-consumer gold and silver bullion store, and this happened just recently, I think in either June or July when they said they're going to launch this. And what this means for the company is that they're able to sell their gold and silver straight to consumers, which gives them higher profit margins, versus the traditional route, which is to sell to wholesalers like maybe jewelry makers or just other bullion stores out there. So the fact that they're selling direct to consumer and they're probably going to go some sort of e-commerce route because they don't have physical presence, this means that they're going to have higher margins on the gold they produce. One other thing to note about where they're situated is that Peru is the 6th largest producer in the world of gold right now. So it's a fairly large place for gold miners to be. And a lot of the major producers like Barrick Gold Corp do actually operate in Peru as well. Inca One Gold Corp owns 2 different facilities. The first one is their Chala one, and it's got a permitted capacity of 100 tons per day and a maximum operating capacity of 150 tons per day. And it's a fully integrated processing facility with in-house metallurgy and chemical labs, desorption and smelting facilities. So we can see that this is no small processing facility as it can process 100 tons of ore per day. That doesn't mean they're going to make 100 tons of gold per day because that would be insane, but it means they can process the ores which eventually turn down into gold. And later on we'll talk about how much gold you can get out from a ton of ore. The next facility which we're going to look at right now is their Quarry One. And the Quarry One is a larger facility and it's able to process 350 tons per day. And it's very similar to the Chala One. Everything's very integrated into there. So they have all the materials and all the equipment they need to process the gold right on site. As of 2019, Inca One reported that they produced a total of roughly 25,000 ounces of gold and they did $35 million in sales. So this roughly gives me an average selling price of gold of around $1,400 per ounce. So if we look at the charts for gold, we can see that gold for the year 2019 it started the year off at around $1,200 or $1,300, and it ended the year off at around $1,500 or so. So $1,400 is roughly an average in between, and that's why Inca Gold ended up with sales of $35 million and an average price of $1,400 per ounce. Currently, across both plants, they have a 65% unused capacity, which allows for future expansion. So right now, the plants are only utilized up to 35%, which means that the company has a lot more growth ahead of it, and it's able to process a lot more ores in the future without having to build out a new facility. If we look at the insider ownership of this company, 47% of this company is owned by insiders. So this is great for us as shareholders when we're looking into a company that's owned by insiders because the insiders also are aligned with shareholders to make the company profitable so that both the insiders and the shareholders benefit. If there isn't much ownership by insiders, this means that the insiders have a weak motivation to make the company succeed. So this is a good sign for us looking at this company as investors. And one last thing, they also have the best CFO of all time. His name is Kevin Hart. Now let's take a look at the operational highlights. So over the past quarter, we can see that Inca One actually was hit fairly significantly, and this is due to COVID. So a lot of the small miners were unable to operate in the beginning of COVID, and this ultimately impacted the Inca One Gold Corp's processing facilities. One other thing to note about their facilities is that they were unable to operate multiple shifts. So they only had one shift going per day, which definitely stifled production. They sold 3,442 ounces of gold in Q4, which is a decline year over year. And if we look at how much they sold in the comparable quarter in the previous year, they sold 6,320 ounces of gold, which represents a decline of 45.5%. But then again, this is also in light of COVID, and they only have one shift going. If they have two shifts going, they could probably have produced just the same amount or even a little bit more. One good thing that we see from the operational highlights though is that their gross profit margins have increased over the years. Previously in Q4 of 2019, they had a 5.5% gross margin. However, in Q4 of 2020, they had an 8.6% gross margin. So that gross margin grew by over 50%. And I think the increase in gold price definitely helped with their gross margins. And if this continues on, we could see the gross margins hit double digits. Now, if we dive a bit more into the financials, we're looking at the balance sheet here. And usually we look at the current ratio to see how financially stable the company is. So you can see here that the current assets is just below current liabilities, putting their current ratio somewhere at 0.94. Which means that if the company was to stop operating, they aren't able to pay off their current liabilities with their current assets and could go under. But there is some saving grace in their cash flow statement, which we'll talk a little bit about later on. We can see that the total assets, though, is $22 million versus their total liabilities at $16 or $17 million, meaning that they have more assets than liabilities, giving us a positive shareholder equity. So from this standpoint, I'd say their balance sheet is so-so and maybe shaky at best, but it really all depends on cash flow and the income. Now let's go to their income statement and see what you can see here. We can see that the revenues decline year over year. It only declined by about $3 million, which is actually fairly surprising, seeing that in Q4, the gold sold actually declined by 45%. And we see here revenues only declined by about 10% year over year, so that's not too bad, especially in the world with COVID. But we can see here that their margins aren't as good year over year compared to last year, as their margins declined and they actually had a gross operating margin deficit. And on top of that, they posted a loss from operations of $2.8 million. If we look at the total loss for the year, it was at $4.2 million, which is a fairly significant number for a $22 million market cap company. Now let's scroll down to the cash flow statement and see what they have there. So when we go down to the cash flow statement, we can see that they actually have a positive cash flow, which is kind of surprising seeing that they had a negative net income, but let's look a bit deeper into the cash flow statement. So you can see that things that are not involving cash, such as depreciation, share-based payments, and also this accretion on the contractual liabilities as a result of the acquisition of Anthem United. These are some fairly big ticket items that do not involve cash. They also had changes in non-cash operational working capital, which include receivables, which is $2.7 million. So ultimately, those things help boost cash flow up to $3.57 million. So although their net income was negative, ultimately looking at the cash of the company, they gained $3.57 million in the bank. That goes to show you can't always trust the income statement because the income statement accounts for things that are also not cash. We can see here that they didn't have any financing activities, so they didn't actually sell any shares to raise capital. In fact, they actually paid out money in terms of financing activities, so they paid back some interest and paid back some liabilities. And they also invested into their property by purchasing more equipment or adding to the plant or doing upgrades to their plants. And they sold off some equipment as well. A few other things that I want to mention from the MD&A, which is the Management Discussion and Analysis. Management saw in the past 4 weeks before releasing this report that their tons per day or tons processed per day went to 82. So this seems to be an increase compared to the COVID era, which is probably a little bit lower, maybe in the 50 to 60, but they didn't disclose those numbers. But they seemed optimistic that the tons per day is only going to continue going up from here. The company is also working to improve worker safety by providing PPE, as well as implementing good health practices into the business. So I see a management team that cares about their workers here. And when a management team cares about their workers generally are happier and are more satisfied in their jobs. If you guys want to know more about the financial position of this company or just more details about what management thinks, you should check out their financial statements as well as the management discussion and analysis. Now looking forward towards the future growth of this company. So a few things that I see here is that if the company was operating at full capacity, I think that the Core 1 can actually produce around 64,000 ounces of gold per year, or that equals to $128 million in revenue. And I got this number from the company presentation. So you can see here that the Chala 1 produces around 0.6 ounces of gold per ton, and the Core 1 produces 0.5 ounces per ton. And if we multiply these by the maximum tons per day and multiply that by days per year, then we get these numbers here of 64,000 ounces of gold for the Core 1. And for the Chala 1, they can produce roughly around 21,900 ounces of gold in a year, and that translates to revenue of $43.8 million per year. However, these are all based off of gold prices sitting at $2,000. So if gold prices drop below that, then the revenue is going to be significantly less. If gold prices rise to $3,000 or even $5,000, as the super bullish gold analysts predict, then we can see the revenue from each of these facilities being multiplied by 2.5 times. But with gold prices sitting at $2,000, the total revenue across both these facilities could potentially be $160 million per year. And if we look at this revenue number that they could put up with their full capacity versus their market cap today, Inca One Gold Corp seems like a pretty good investment as a speculative gamble right now. So with a market cap of $22 million and comparing that to $160 million of revenue, if we assign a PS ratio of 1, we could see the stock price or the market cap of this company going up to $160 million, which represents an 8 times increase from today's price. Another thing about the future for this company is that management believes that they should continue expanding through merger and acquisition. So I expect this company to do some sort of raises in the future to raise capital to go out there and purchase other mining facilities or processing facilities. Their direct-to-consumer play is also an interesting one because there aren't many public companies out there who are direct-to-consumer. So this is one of the few public companies that actually sell gold direct-to-consumer. And if this really takes off, especially with all of this e-commerce stuff taking off right now, we could see this company continuing to increase their share price for investors like you and I who are looking to this company right now. So my final thoughts for this company right now is that gold prices are never really certain. We don't know if they're going to rise or if they're going to fall. However, in the face of economic trouble, gold prices tend to rise, which is probably why we're seeing gold rise right now. Gold has been sitting around this level between the $1,400 mark and the $2,000 mark for a good 10 years without any sort of price appreciation above that. So finally, we broke above the previous all-time highs, and this might be a new era for gold where it increases above the $1,800 or $1,900 level up to the 2000s and maybe even the 3000s as analysts predict. And if we're super lucky as investors and get into gold stocks right now, it could even go to $5,000. Inca One Gold has not yet reached their maximum capacity for production, and they have a lot more room for expansion, which makes this an interesting investment to me right now. Cash flows are positive for this company, so they're able to sustain their operating activity and not go out of business within the next year, in my opinion. Ultimately, I do see this as a high risk, high reward stock though, because they are a very small company, but they could also be a target for acquisition where a bigger fish comes along and buys out the processing facilities because they see it as a good opportunity. And if they do get bought out, then shareholders will also get rewarded handsomely. And lastly, if we look at the charts to see when's a great point to enter, we can see here that the MACD is actually crossed and it's heading downwards as we saw a huge 11.5% drop today. So I think that I would wait for the MACD to settle down and probably cross back up like we saw over here before I buy into the stock. And I would wait for the RSI to drop somewhere between the 40 and 30 level before considering buying into the stock. So those are my thoughts for Inca One Gold. If you're interested in the stock, let me know in the comments down below. If you enjoyed this video and a deep dive on Inca One, smash that like button, as well as if you're new here and love to learn about stocks, especially gold mining stocks, and want to join my journey, hit that subscribe button and the notification bell for new videos coming out very soon to you. I will be reviewing 3 or 4 companies in the next couple weeks, so look out for those videos. Keep up the grind and have a great day.